Good morning, I'm Dr. Kay Payne, and in this session we're going to be talking about multicultural issues. And there are a number of slides to get through in this session. I'm going to go through them very quickly, and some of them I'm going to refer you back to the notes that you downloaded from the webpage, and rather than talk you through all of those slides, I'll just refer you back to the notes. So let's go ahead and get started. With regard to multicultural issues, it's first important to ask us the question, well, why are multicultural issues important in our profession? And so I've listed a few things here for you. This is a very important, ASHA has determined that this is a very important concept for us, and that pretty much everyone needs to be culturally competent or culturally literate at least. And so there are several questions with regard to multicultural issues that are on the Praxis. The first issue is overrepresentation of minorities in special education, and many of you who work in the public schools are aware of this issue. This might be due to a number of factors which we'll talk about today, and probably first and foremost test bias, which we'll come to later. Health disparities are also a big issue with regard to adults, particularly adults with hypertension, multicultural, minority populations with a higher incidence of hypertension and stroke. And so we might be seeing adult individuals on our caseload as a result of health disparities, access to health care, as well as quality of health care and affordability of health care. So these are some of the issues that pretty much result in multicultural populations needing our services as speech-language pathologists. You're also aware of the academic achievement gap. Some literature has shown that minority populations, there is a large gap in achievement, high school graduation, high school attrition, not just overrepresentation in special education, but these issues also go over into regular education and the wasted potential of many minorities in this country for achieving their full potential. You also know about the literacy gap. Some literature has attempted to relate literacy achievement with dialect spoken or second language spoken in this country, and there's a large body of literature on that for you if that's your interest. Another issue is also the lack of diversity in our profession. Given all of these things that I've previously described to you, that result in us having a large number, potentially having a large number of minorities and multicultural populations in our caseload, there is also at the same time a lack of diversity in our field. Minorities in our field still represent about 4%, and that's a really paltry number. African Americans represent about, I believe the last figures were about 1.8% African Americans, and the rest of that 4% is comprised of others who identify themselves as minorities in the profession. So there's often this mismatch with cultures and perspectives between the service providers and the clients in our caseload. Our profession definitely values diversity because that's something that is just ethical, that we value diversity and that we want to give, particularly when it comes to children, give them the greatest opportunity to achieve their potential. And so really when I teach classes in multicultural issues on campus, I tell our students, these are the people who really deserve your best services, okay? Because they have a history of not getting the best services and not having access to services. So that value on diversity is something that we really try to instill within our clinicians. And then finally, the final factor is the legal mandate for our attention to multicultural issues. That came first, of course, through PL 94-142 in 1975, and that was the first progressive legal mandate that required that all students who are tested in special education be tested with culturally appropriate materials. And at that time there was a big scramble because we didn't have any real culturally appropriate materials in our field. And now we certainly have more. We could do better. And so these multicultural issues are essential, and they're important to our profession. Okay, let's move on to our next slide. When are multicultural variables important? Go back one more. Okay, when are multicultural issues important? This is a little bit different from why they're important, but we often have what we call invisible disabilities. We have them here in the university where individuals do not have to declare that they have a disability, for example, a head injury or a learning disability. And so when we are, we can't actually, well, let me just say, when we are, as SLPs, when the disability is visible to us, for example, a person comes in with a cleft palate, or comes in with cerebral palsy, or comes in with an organic kind of disorder, it's apparent to us that they're going to need our services. Okay, it's not always apparent to us when the disability is invisible, though. Who has a learning disability? Okay, who has autism? You know, where do we draw that line? So we as SLPs play a very big part, as you know, in determining who's going to get put into special education, who's going to require our services, and there are issues on both sides of it. Sometimes there are parents who demand services for their children that we might not necessarily believe that they need. Or on the other side, we as professionals might be, and I'm going to our next point on the possibility of misdiagnosis, including some individuals in our caseload who may not necessarily need to be classified as having a disability. And that goes back to that point on the first slide of overrepresentation of minorities in special education. So it's a fine line, and we really have to be very discerning when it comes to minorities, and very sensitive to the issues. And we'll talk later about how to distinguish a real disorder from just a language difference. Okay? Some of the outcomes of misdiagnosis would include a false positive. A false positive is that case where we as SLPs, through misdiagnosis, include more people on our caseload than probably should be, particularly minorities in this case. It results in increased caseloads for us, special education placement for individuals who might not be really deserve to be placed in special education. And let me just say a word about that. As you know, typically when children are placed in special education, their prospects are limited. there's not really an expectation that these are going to be the individuals who go on to college, who get the A's in the courses, and who are actually encouraged to go on. And there's a real possibility that once they get into special education, because of the kinds of services that they receive, they're going to be far behind, and they're not going to catch up to peers in regular education, and they're doomed to be in special education for the rest of their lives. And that's a terrible, terrible sentence to pronounce on someone who does not deserve to be placed in special education. Also, the result of false positives, missed appointments, why kids don't come to us, or why our clients don't come back to us when we think that they should be. Well, they don't think that they need our services, and that results in missed appointments, or people who don't come consistently, and that's a waste of, as you know, it's a waste of your time, it's a waste of resources, the things that we've gathered, and the preparation that we've had to, in preparation for them to come in. So these are very serious issues for us. False negatives. Well, waste of resources I went over. And false negatives. False negatives are where we miss, okay? We miss out on someone who should be getting our services who did not, okay? And that results particularly with regard to health disparities, individuals who are from multicultural populations not getting the services they need, okay, and not being able to live their lives to their fullest potential. So lack of needed services, reduced productivity on their part, and reduced quality of life on their part. So these are some of the instances of when multicultural issues are extremely important. Let's move on then to some of the sociolinguistic variables. This is a big jump from what I was just presenting before, but the foundation of multicultural issues is an understanding of sociolinguistics and how language and culture play a really big part in what we do as speech-language pathologists. So I'm going to present this to you, but I'm not going to go through each one of the bullets on this page because I'm pretty sure you can understand how these may be variables that make a difference in the kind of language that is produced by an individual. And particularly kids, when they come to us, and it's our own judgment as to whether or not they should be included in our caseload and receive our services or be placed in special education. It's important for us to understand what makes these individuals produce the kind of language that they may be producing that has nothing at all to do with whether or not they have a speech or language disorder. So let's move on. One of the foremost issues, of course, in sociolinguistics is an understanding of a dialect. And so this is essential for all speech-language pathologists. And you'll be surprised at how many SLPs make a lot of assumptions about dialect, and how many people in the general population make a lot of negative assumptions about dialect, and that's not something that we can afford to do as educated speech-language pathologists. So it's important for us to understand this issue fully. A dialect, I give you the definition there. It's a very loose definition. It's simply a spoken variety of a language germane to an established social group with a common historical origin. So that group has a common historical origin or a common regional origin. All those things come into play. And it's a spoken variety. Okay, notice I took the time to say it's a spoken variety and not a written variety in most cases. We can find some exceptions to that, but not in this country with regard to English. There are written dialects of some Asian languages, but that's beyond the scope of our review here. Some examples of dialects would be Standard English, of course, for us, which is the written variety. And it is the linguistic standard for education and for interaction in this society. It is sometimes known as the lingua franca, Lingua-Franca. It's a common dialect that most people will speak, and it's a language of commerce and high social interaction. So the standard, it's very important to understand what the standard is, and to understand that the linguistic standard is simply another variety of language, but it just happens to be the high, what's sometimes called the high variety, and the language that is written, and typically the language of education. Other dialects within a general language group, which are typically just spoken varieties, might include American English, or let me just say some dialects of American English, such as African American English would be a spoken variety, which is not typically written, and it fits, of course, as you would see the definition, the first bullet, which is the definition of a dialect. So African American English, and we'll come to this slide a little later, it's not just a matter of being poor English or broken English, so to speak, but it is a true dialect variety of English. I list there some others for you. Even American English itself is a dialect of the world variety of English, and British English would be one of those. English right now is fast becoming a world language, so there are many, many varieties of English. So dialects, some points to remember about dialects. Dialects are not hierarchically organized, although some are stigmatized, such as British Cockney or African American English. They're stigmatized not by us as SLPs, because we are here to know the difference, but in the general population, we have to recognize that they do not receive full acceptance on par with Standard English. It's also important for us to understand that dialects are not the same as slang, rap, jive talk, or even broken English. And another point is that even with African Americans, an extremely important point for SLPs to understand is that not all African Americans speak AAE. Okay, to do that, to make that kind of assumption would be a stereotype. Okay, and that's not something that we can afford to be doing as professionals. Moving to the next slide, you see some examples of dialects here in the U.S. I won't dwell on this slide very long. Just give it to you for your edification. So, let's move on and talk about African American English. Okay. African American English, AAE, sometimes known as Ebonics, sometimes known as AAVE. We'll refer to it here as AAE. Ebonics, I will tell you, is a colloquial term, and if you're describing this variety in your reports and in the scholarly literature, it would be referred to as African American English, respect for those people who speak it. and not Ebonics. We could go into a long treatise on how that name came to be ascribed to this variety and the controversy that surrounds it, but that would take a little bit more time than we have here this morning. It originated during the slave trade. There are a lot of misconceptions about where this originated. Actually, linguists have shown that it originated in Africa, came with the African slaves through the Middle Passage, and remained on the plantation, something that's known as plantation Creole. It is a Creole, and a Creole is a conglomeration of different languages. Okay, this process of creolization is also something that we don't have time to go into, but a full course on sociolinguistics would explain to you the process of creolization and how African American English became what it is today, and how its features also include influences and lots of carryovers from various African languages as well as European languages. So it's not just English in African languages, but African American English is a conglomeration of lots of European languages as well as African languages. And it really gets a stigma, of course, because there was racism in the country, and there was segregation and bigotry with regard to African Americans in this country. But it's important to note that the linguistic rules of African American English are well established, orderly, and historically derived. Can you get that for me? The back. Okay. The knowledge and respect for this linguistic variety is essential for SLPs, and I'll just read it from the front. This is one of the slides that I'll not dwell on because in the interest of time, but I will refer you to your notes. Here are some of the most common linguistic features of African American English. This particular, and I'll give credit to Celeste Roseberry McKibben in her book, recent book, and you can find a list of other linguistic features of African American English and other dialects in other resources that if you're interested. But here are some of the characteristics of English, African American English, morphology and syntax. Okay, and just to name a few, omission of the possessive noun. So you'll hear get John pencil. Okay, I give these to you to. It's not something that you have to memorize because you've probably heard these, but just to know that these things have been categorized. They have a name for it. Okay, they've been linguistically categorized, and so you might get questions on Praxis with regard to, you might get some of these, a question that gives you an example of one of these, and might ask, well, is that a disorder or is that a language difference? So it's important to know these characteristics and features of AAE morphology and syntax. Okay, again, some of the others. Here are some characteristics of articulation and phonology. These are also important for you. And I won't go through these, but refer you to your notes. some other types of characteristics. This gives you a comparison of mainstream American English, sometimes referred to as Standard English, and African American English. So with that, I'd like to move on quickly to English influenced by other languages. Not only will you encounter African Americans on your caseload, you'll also, depending on your region within the nation, also encounter speakers of other languages, and or children whose native language is not English, and home language is not English. So we need to know a little bit about that. So this is English influenced by other languages. Their native language is other than English. What's important to note is that what you can find even in speakers of African American English and speakers of where English is a second language, you can find idiosyncratic or individualized features in their speech. What we're concerned about as SLPs is making the distinction between what is general for all speakers of that language, and how that language is influenced, the influences of that language are produced in terms of in English. So we're concerned about the features that are predictable and common, the most common features, and not those that are idiosyncratic to the individual. And that's important to note, because many times it'll be that idiosyncratic feature might be a disorder. For example, if an African American speaker is pronouncing thumb as thumb, or thumb as some, that's idiosyncratic. Okay, because we might expect that, given the features of African American English, there are some. What's common is that, well, we might see tum for thumb, okay, but never would we see in a common feature of African American English as thumb for thumb, and that's going to be one of those that you need to pay attention to. That is an idiosyncratic feature, and possibly a communication disorder. So if you get a preponderance of those kinds of features that are outside of what the common features are, and the ones that are listed here, plus some others, that's when you got to make a distinction between a disorder and a difference. Note that influences from other languages can affect everything from the phonology, the syntax, morphology, as well as the pragmatics. And so we have to know, we have to test all of these things for one thing. And we've got to be able to distinguish within those categories what's idiosyncratic, what's common, and what's a disorder. Here I give you some features of Spanish-influenced English, and these are important to know. I dare say you're going to have something on the Praxis with regard to knowing what the features of Spanish-influenced English are that would not be considered a speech or a language disorder. And if you get some that are way, way off this chart, then now those are the ones that might be, that you might want to say, oh yeah, that's off, that's out of the question. I would call that a disorder rather than a language difference. Roseberry McKibben, as a reference, also gives some of the articulation differences that are commonly observed among Spanish speakers. And